From childhood, human beings are told that selfishness is wrong. Parents warn against it. Teachers condemn it. Religions promise virtue only through sacrifice, and yet, in every action, something else hides. A shadow, a secret interest that no one dares to confess. When a child shares a toy, there is the subtle hope of praise. When a friend comforts another, there is the quiet satisfaction of being needed. When a stranger donates to the poor, there is the warm glow of self-approval. Behind generosity, there remains the silent presence of the self. It waits. It hungers. It always claims a share. This truth is disturbing because it shakes the foundation of morality. If even kindness is selfish, then what becomes of goodness? If compassion hides desire, then what becomes of purity? The world prefers to deny this. Societies build myths of holy selflessness. Religions speak of saints who desire nothing for themselves. But beneath the halo, the same heartbeat persists. The need for meaning, for belonging, for recognition. Alan Watts once suggested that the attempt to be purely unselfish is itself the greatest form of ego. Because in trying to destroy the self, one only magnifies it. The saint becomes proud of humility. The martyr becomes intoxicated with sacrifice. The mask of purity only hides another layer of desire, and here lies the paradox. The more selfishness is denied, the more dangerous it becomes. For what is denied becomes disguised, and what is disguised becomes corrupt. True wisdom does not come from fighting selfishness. It comes from seeing it clearly, as it is, without shame. For selfishness is not the enemy of compassion. It is the root from which compassion grows. This reflection does not flatter the human ego. It unsettles. It whispers that no one is pure, that every action, even the most noble, is touched by desire. And yet, within that whisper lies a hidden liberation. Because when selfishness is no longer denied, it begins to transform. It ceases to be a shadow and becomes a light. It ceases to be corruption and becomes honesty. It ceases to be guilt and becomes love. This is the forgotten wisdom of selfishness. A truth the world resists, but a truth that, once seen, changes everything. The illusion of pure altruism. Human beings grow up believing that altruism is the highest virtue. The stories of saints, heroes, and martyrs are held up as ideals. Each tale insists that the greatest good is to deny oneself entirely, to live only for others. But the reality is different. Every act, no matter how noble, carries within it a trace of self-interest. The soldier who sacrifices life for comrades seeks honor. The mother who devotes herself to her child seeks continuity of her own being. The philanthropist who gives away wealth seeks release from guilt or the sweetness of significance. This is not cynicism. It is observation. And observation reveals that altruism, when examined closely, is never as pure as it pretends. Society, however, demands the performance of purity. It rewards the mask more than the truth. And so, people learn to act generous while secretly protecting the self. They learn to deny selfishness in words, but pursue it in deeds. This denial creates a fracture between appearance and reality, between the face shown to the world and the desire hidden within. Alan Watts pointed out that such fractures are unsustainable. When someone tries to be purely unselfish, they are playing a game of pretending to be beyond human nature. And the more seriously the game is played, the more inauthentic life becomes. For life cannot be lived as an act, and generosity cannot be genuine when it is performed under the weight of denial. The illusion of pure altruism, then, is not only false, it is dangerous because it pushes selfishness into the shadows where it festers. Better to admit its presence openly, honestly, without shame. To see that even the saint is selfish is not to degrade sainthood. It is to reveal it as human. And only in humanity can compassion truly live. The burden of denial. When selfishness is denied, it does not disappear. It hides. It sinks beneath the surface like a stone, waiting in silence, distorting everything above. Human beings are taught to condemn their own desires. They are told that to want, to seek, to claim is shameful. And so they begin to disguise their longings in respectable clothing. Ambition dresses itself as service. Pleasure dresses itself as sacrifice. Desire dresses itself as duty. The result is not purity, but pretense. Life becomes a theater where everyone plays the part of the selfless soul, while backstage, the ego whispers its demands. This denial creates weight. It presses down upon the heart, demanding constant vigilance. Every impulse must be watched, every motive must be corrected, every selfish thought must be swept away before it can be seen. But nothing exhausts the spirit more quickly than fighting its own nature. For what is denied does not vanish. It grows stronger in the shadows. It mutates into resentment, into manipulation, into hidden cruelty. The one who proclaims unselfishness most loudly often demands the most admiration in secret. The one who sacrifices most completely often hides bitterness beneath the smile. The one who denies selfishness most fiercely often becomes consumed by the very ego they claim to transcend. Alan Watts observed that humility, when forced, becomes pride. Selflessness, when performed, becomes hypocrisy. The denial of ego creates the most aggressive form of ego, the ego that insists on not existing. And so, relationships suffer. A friend offers help, but secretly tallies the debt. A lover gives affection, but quietly demands obedience in return. A parent sacrifices everything, but later resents the child for having lived too freely. The burden of denial poisons what it touches. It transforms generosity into obligation. It turns love into control. It makes kindness into a weapon. Selfishness, when denied, becomes destructive. Not because it is evil, but because it is hidden. And what is hidden always corrupts. The path forward cannot be more denial, more masks, more moral theater. The path forward is to look directly at the selfish impulse without judgment, to admit it, to accept it, to allow it to breathe. For only then does selfishness lose its power to deceive. And only then can honesty begin to heal the fracture, the revelation of the self. When selfishness is finally seen without disguise, a quiet revelation arises. The ego, once treated as an enemy, begins to reveal its true nature. The self does not exist as a solitary island. It cannot breathe without air. It cannot survive without food, water, warmth. And each of these comes from the world beyond the skin. The idea of a separate self is only half a story, for the self is stitched together with everything it depends upon. The breath is shared with the trees. The food is shared with the soil. The body is born from countless ancestors. Even thought itself is borrowed from language, culture, and memory. So when selfishness seeks its own survival, it unknowingly serves the whole. When the hand feeds the mouth, the body continues. When the body continues, the community benefits. When the community thrives, the individual finds shelter and belonging. The revelation is this: the boundary between self and other is porous, fragile, and shifting. The more clearly the self is seen, the less separate it becomes. Alan Watts often compared the self to a wave upon the ocean. The wave has shape, form, and movement, yet it is never apart from the water. In the same way, the self has desires, fears, and ambitions, yet it is never apart from life itself. This vision dissolves the illusion that selfishness and compassion are enemies. To care for the self is also to care for the whole to which the self belongs. To nourish the body is to nourish the network of relationships that depend upon it. To protect the mind is to protect the clarity that touches others. The revelation of the self is not a call to abandon desire. It is the recognition that desire flows within a larger field of being, and in that recognition, selfishness ceases to be narrow. It expands, it ripples outward. The person who accepts the self does not cling to it. Instead, they see it as a doorway into connection. Through the self, they find the other. Through the ego, they glimpse the whole. And so, what once appeared as selfishness begins to shine as interdependence. The self is not a prison, it is a bridge. When selfishness transforms into love. When selfishness is no longer denied, it begins to soften. The harsh edge of greed, the restless hunger for possession, slowly dissolves. What remains is the simple truth of desire, the wish to live, to feel, to connect. Seen clearly, this desire is not sinister. It is innocent. It is the child reaching for warmth. It is the body seeking nourishment. It is the heart longing to be understood. In this light, selfishness becomes transparent. It shows itself not as corruption, but as the engine of care. For who can offer kindness without first knowing the taste of their own longing? Who can recognize suffering without first having suffered? The wound within the self is what opens the eyes to the wound within another. Alan Watts often observed that love is not the opposite of selfishness. It is selfishness awakened. It is desire expanded beyond the narrow cage of me into the vast field of we. The mother who protects her child does not act from pure sacrifice. Her joy and her survival are bound to the child's. The friend who listens deeply does not abandon themselves. They find meaning in the connection. The lover who embraces does not erase desire. They allow desire to blossom into union. This is the hidden transformation. When selfishness is embraced consciously, it turns outward without force. It ceases to demand and begins to give. It ceases to control and begins to trust. Selfishness that is denied becomes manipulation, but selfishness that is seen becomes generosity. For in recognizing one's own hunger, one becomes tender toward the hunger of all beings. And this tenderness is love. Not the love that preaches purity, not the love that demands recognition, but the love that arises naturally, like water flowing downhill, effortless and inevitable. Here lies the paradox. What the world condemns as selfishness is, in truth, the seed of compassion. And when that seed is allowed to grow in the sunlight of awareness, it flowers into love. Love does not erase the self. It reveals the self as inseparable from the other. And in that revelation, selfishness fulfills its secret destiny, the hidden virtue. What has long been condemned as vice begins to reveal itself as virtue. Selfishness, once feared and shamed, now appears as the raw material of authenticity. For when it is faced honestly, without masks, it no longer corrupts, it clarifies. The person who admits selfishness speaks and acts with a rare kind of honesty. There is no hidden agenda behind their kindness, no secret score kept behind their generosity. Their giving is clean because it does not pretend to be pure. In a world addicted to performance, this honesty is revolutionary. The friend who helps because they want to help is more trustworthy than the one who insists they expect nothing in return. The lover who admits their longing is more real than the one who hides desire behind the mask of virtue. The parent who recognizes their sacrifices as partly self-serving is less likely to poison the child with resentment. Alan Watts often suggested that wisdom comes not from striving to be perfect, but from recognizing imperfection as natural. And so selfishness becomes a virtue not by disappearing, but by being integrated. It becomes part of a larger rhythm, where personal desire and universal belonging move as one. This hidden virtue liberates relationships. No longer bound by the weight of impossible ideals, human beings can meet each other as they are. Desire is not denied, but shared. Care is not a duty, but a delight. Love is not performance, but presence. The world may still resist this truth. It may cling to the dream of purity, to the mythology of saints and martyrs, but beneath the surface, life itself whispers otherwise. Every creature seeks its own survival, and in doing so serves the greater whole. The bird gathers food for its young. The tree spreads roots to drink from the soil. The ocean swells and crashes, each wave both for itself and for the sea. In the same way, human selfishness is not a flaw in the design. It is the design. And when illuminated, it becomes the very force that makes love possible. Thus, the wisdom of selfishness is not about glorifying greed. It is about seeing through illusion. It is about discovering that the self, once understood, does not stand against others, but with them. And in this recognition, selfishness reveals its hidden virtue, the power to give authentically, to love without pretense, and to live without shame. The silence of truth. At the end of this reflection, something unsettling yet liberating remains. Selfishness has not been destroyed, nor purified, nor erased. It has been seen, and in being seen, it has been transformed. For selfishness was never the true enemy. The real enemy was the mask, the desperate attempt to appear selfless, pure, beyond human nature. That mask fractured relationships, poisoned intentions, and filled life with quiet hypocrisy. But when the mask is dropped, the truth stands naked. And the truth is this: selfishness is simply the pulse of life. It is the body yearning for survival. It is the mind searching for meaning. It is the heart longing for connection. Once accepted, selfishness is no longer shameful. It becomes transparent. It reveals its secret function to bind the individual to the whole. For in caring for the self, one inevitably cares for the network of beings upon which the self depends. In loving another, one discovers the self reflected in their eyes. In serving the world, one feels the world serving back. Alan Watts often suggested that to live authentically is to stop pretending, to let things be as they are. And in the light of that suggestion, selfishness no longer needs to be condemned. It only needs to be understood. What once seemed like corruption now appears as clarity. What once seemed like isolation now reveals interdependence. What once seemed like vice now discloses itself as virtue. The silence after this realization is profound. There is no need for moral theater, no need for performance, no need for denial. There is only the rhythm of life flowing naturally, effortlessly, without justification. In this silence, selfishness and compassion no longer oppose each other. They are two sides of the same current, two movements of the same tide. One begins in desire, the other blossoms into love. The wisdom of selfishness is not a license for greed. It is an invitation to honesty. To live without shame for being human, to give without the burden of appearing holy, to love without the pretense of perfection, and so the journey comes full circle. Selfishness, once condemned, now stands as the hidden root of compassion. It is not the obstacle to love, but its seed. not the shadow of morality, but the ground from which authenticity grows. In the stillness that follows, the realization is simple. There is no need to divide life into selfish and unselfish, pure and impure. There is only life itself, moving as it must, expressing itself through each breath, each action, each desire. To see this is to be free. Free from guilt. Free from hypocrisy. Free to love, not in spite of selfishness, but because of it. And in that freedom, the human spirit finally rests.